Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Kalen. You're listening to Corner Culture, Thoughts Off the Mainstream. Again, my name's Kalen. I'm your boy, your host, owner and operator of Corner Culture and Kosatoshi.shop. If you like Bitcoin stuff, check out my store. I got a bunch of cool AI designs on there. Anyway, today I am just realizing that, this is my third or fourth video going to be on the channel now. And all y'all don't really know anything about me. And I have a ridiculous collection of crazy stories. I've done a lot of really weird stuff. I've got a very colored history, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm very fortunate. I'm very, very lucky to have experienced the things I've experienced, been the places I've been, and met the people I've met, and just a whole confluence of experiences. And one of those things that I've experienced most prominently for me is politics, and just like kind of where I came from, where I went, and where I'm at now. It's been a weird, twisty, windy road. And so I just kind of want to let you all know where I'm at on that so that you guys can put whatever it is that you hear me saying into perspective, put it into context, or make whatever other sense of it that you may want to make. So, interestingly enough, I was born and raised in Boise, Idaho, and Idaho is one of the reddest states out there. I think it is. At the time that I was there, I think it was, in fact, statistically the reddest state in the union. But I wasn't born in a red house. My parents are very blue, very Democrat, very liberal. My mom's an ex-Mormon from Phoenix, Arizona. My dad is liberal from Omaha, Nebraska. They met in Salt Lake City, of all places. I know that's weird. And then they moved to Boise and started a family, had me and my brother. So we grew up in this, this blue dot in a red state. And, this was in, I was born in the early 80s, 83. So I'm actually 40 right now. I just turned 40 a few weeks ago. And so growing up in a red state, in a blue house, kind of felt like an odd duck a lot. Going out and growing up and meeting new people and meeting like parents of friends and hearing the kind of things they'd say and sort of, realizing that it didn't really jive with the things I was being taught in my house from my parents. That was kind of, interesting. But it was nice when I look back on it now because it was a level playing field. Nobody hated me or judged me because I had these liberal ideals. I think a lot of people probably just kind of rolled their eyes because I would just repeat these things that I was told were true and I believed were true growing up. And so anyway, I was in Boise until I was 28, and that was 2011. Somebody might want to check my math. I think I was 28. It was 2011 that I moved down to California. I left a whole life that I had built up there. I was in a cover band. I was selling real estate. I owned a house and I had roommates, and I was making money on the house because it had enough bedrooms in it that it not only was it paying the mortgage, I was actually collecting some money on top of that. Things were good, and then 2008 happened. The financial crash of 2008 completely wiped me out. I lost the house, I lost all my jobs, and all my 1099 income that I was on at the time. And I had a girlfriend that I was very serious with. We had been together for like 4 or 5 years, and obviously that didn't last long and under those circumstances. And there was a lot of other stuff going on too, which I won't get into. But anyway, moved down to California, decided to start a new life, and I decided that I was going to go to music school. So I went to this music school in Pasadena, California. At the time, it was called the LA Music Academy, and I had one of the best experiences of my life during that 1.5 years. First of all, I moved to California, coming from Idaho. That was a totally different thing for me at the time. I remember experiencing some sort of anxiety when I started seeing in the city that a lot of people had bars on their windows and gates on their doors, like iron bar gates on their doors. And I was like, who in the hell is trying to break into these people's houses and go through their windows and doors that they got to bar the place up? That kind of gave me some anxiety. I settled in pretty quick though. Had my first shooting just in a couple months that I was there. My apartment got shot up in the middle of the night. Me and 2 other roommates, both of whom were also students at the school, not in the same program as me, but we were all students at the school. At like 1:30 in the morning, just 10 .45 caliber bullets came flying into the apartment from very close range. We could hear that the gun was very, very close. We never suspected it would have been firing at us, but it was for some reason, and the cops didn't know why, and of course they didn't know shit, and they didn't tell us anything, and they never followed up with us afterwards, and so, whatever, it is what it is. Luckily, nobody got hurt. Nobody was injured, so Thank God for that. But I got settled, got integrated into the community at the school. All these great people from all over the world. That was the best part about the school. Well, that was one of the best things about the school. I met people from Brazil, Japan, China, Turkey, Sweden, Central South America, all over Central South America, and even Ethiopia, and even India. All over the world. I met these people. In Idaho, as you can imagine, not a lot of diversity up there. Pretty homogenous. You get closer to college, Boise State University, it gets a little more diverse, but it's mostly just people coming in from Hawaii and California. That's kind of it. So it's kind of a limited diversity, even in that case. But this diversity was like global. I learned about Brazilian music, and I learned about Swedish culture, and I spoke about that in another video about my Swede friends at the school. I just learned so much, and it was such a great experience, and I loved it. So after I did the music school, I decided that my best option at the time was to try and hop on a cruise ship playing music. And so I did a couple auditions, and I landed one of them, and I got a gig to play in the jazz trio, the piano trio on board Holland America ships. There, at the time when I first started, there were 8 ships that had this piano trio band in the ships. And by the time I ended, there were only 4. So they were already starting to cut that band down. It's old-timer music. It's waltzes and two-steps and foxtrots and mambos and, that kind of ballroom dance music. But sometimes we got to cut loose and play some real fun jazz, so that was cool. I had a great experience on there as well. So, by the way, I was on the cruise ship for 2 years total, from the first contract to the end of the last contract. I think it was a total of 5 or 6 contracts, each anywhere from 4 to 8 months a piece. Always different musicians I was playing with. I never played with the same musicians each contract, so that was cool. It was always a new, it was new repertoire, new styles, new personalities, that I had to adjust to, some better than others. And I was on a total of 3 ships on all 6 contracts. So that was great. I got really good at playing that style of music, and that was a lot of fun. But traveling. So my first contract started in Florida. We went from Florida through the Panama Canal over to San Diego. That was about 2 weeks, so you're putting along every day. You go a little bit further. So we started in the Caribbean, a few days in the Caribbean, and then we go over to the Panama Canal. That takes like a whole day passing through the Panama Canal. And then it's a few more days going up the Mexican West Coast up to San Diego. And then from San Diego, it was a 7 days at sea. No, I'm sorry. 8 days at sea to get to Hawaii. 8 days at sea in the biggest ocean, just nothing but water everywhere you look for 8 solid days. That was crazy. I know military men when they're, the Navy men, I know they go to at sea for like 45 days at a time. That's crazy. 8 days was more than enough, So anyway, I saw Hawaii, and then we went down south. We went to the South Pacific, French Polynesia. After that, saw Tahiti, Bora Bora, all these super crazy, remote, exotic islands down in the South Pacific. That was absolutely insane. That was my first contract. I could not have been more just like completely speechless at times, just realizing like, holy crap, I'm on this part of the globe. Like if I took a globe and I looked at it, and I'd have to turn it 180 degrees and go, that's where I'm at. That's so crazy. And then, it was like 7 days or 8 days back to, that's what it was. It was 7 days to Hawaii. It was 8 days back to San Diego. That's what it was. And so we were down in the South Pacific. We were on land, I think a total of 2 weeks, from one island to the next. Starbuck Island, by the way, look that up. We putted by Starbuck Island. Not Starbucks, Starbuck Island. So anyway, went back to San Diego, and then did the whole thing all the way completely backwards, all the way back to Florida. So that was interesting. Had another cruise that started in England, in the White Cliffs of Dover. Started in Dover and went up the western Norwegian coast, all the way up to the very tippy top of Norway. And this was in the summer, so we got to see the midnight sun. I stayed up until 4 a.m, and I went outside on the ship, on the boat, and took a picture of the sun that was still up at 4 in the frickin' morning. It was crazy. So saw all the Norwegian fjords. That was insane. I met up with my friends in Sweden when I was in Stockholm. So, this was like a couple years or a year after we had graduated. I think it was almost 2 years after I think that was my last contract. So it was 2 years after we had graduated, hadn't seen each other. And I was in Stockholm, and they drove down from their respective local cities and met me in Stockholm. We went out and drank and ate and it was absolute blast. Got really, really drunk. drunk, painfully drunk. You know, I was closer to 30 at the time, so I could handle it back then. Anyway, that was a blast. Also saw Russia, went all around the Baltic, saw the whole Baltic areas, saw St. Petersburg, spent like 2 days in St. Petersburg. And then there were so this cruise then repositioned down in the Mediterranean, but I had already been to the Mediterranean on a previous contract. So we hit a lot of the same spots in the Mediterranean, but this time we went to Egypt, and we went to Port Alexandria, and we went to Port Said. And from Port Alexandria, you can take the excursion down to Giza, and you can go see the pyramids. And I got lucky. I got to go do that. I saw the pyramids. I went inside the pyramids. I touched the Sphinx. No, I didn't touch it. I don't think they touch it, but I felt like I was close enough to touch it. That was crazy. Port Alexandria is the most insane Gotham City night skyline I've ever seen in my life. I got to go see if there's any photos out there that do justice for what I saw standing on top of the cruise ship looking toward the city of Alexandria at night. That was insane. And speaking of culture shock, I also saw Tangier, Morocco right around this time, and then we were shortly thereafter in Egypt. That was the biggest culture shock I have ever experienced in my life. Living in conditions and style and just a way of life that you didn't know existed. You knew things are bad, you watch the news, you see stuff, but to see a civilized society living in a certain way. When we were taking the bus from Port Alexandria down to Giza, we had to drive through the city, and I have first of all never seen a city so dirty in my life. And as you know now, I've been to a lot of cities in this world. I've never seen a city dirtier. There was a corner that we drove past, and it was like an empty lot where a building should have been standing, but it wasn't. There wasn't. There were buildings all around it, but there was this little empty lot, and it was a trash deposit. It was a dump in the middle of the city. And I realized it as the bus was taking the bridge next to it, going up a little ways, and I could look down and see it a little bit closer. There was actually a small, trash compactor tractor that some dude was driving around in a circle in this thing, just compacting trash down in the middle of the city. So it's just different, man. It's just different. And not to say that it's bad. It's just different. You don't realize how different the world is until you've actually been there and you're like, oh. So anyway, saw that. Then also explored all of the Greek islands and Turkey. I went to Istanbul. One of my friends from the music school, just so happened to be living in an apartment walking distance from where the ship was going to dock when we were in Istanbul. And we were there for an overnight. So we were there for 2 days. Actually, no, I think we were there for 3 days, 2 overnights, 3 days. And so, that was the best time also, because he knew the city, and he has a history degree specifically in Roman and Byzantine times. And so he knew everything. He was just telling me all this stuff. I wish I could remember it all, because all of it was so fascinating. But as a drummer, I got to go see how cymbals are made in person, especially kind of old school style. Istanbul is one of the heartland areas of where cymbals come from. I mean, I know they're not invented there, but I think you could say they're perfected there. Zildjian, one of the most famous brands of all time, originally came from Istanbul or around. They're around. And so there's this company called, I'm going to forget it. Is it called Byzantine? I'm going to forget the name of it. Anyway, you have to take a train about an hour outside of Istanbul to go to this shop. And you could see how cymbals were made and still are, but were 1,000 years ago being made. Compacted mud inside a concrete hut, basically. And the workers are just wearing rolled up jeans and a t-shirt. And they're just hammering away, and they're forging discs of iron and nickel and silver and brass and whatever down into these discs, and flattening them out, and then trimming the edges, and then polishing them up, and that's it. It's just metallurgy. And I felt so in touch with cymbals after that. It was just like, okay, now I see where this shit comes from, and it's really cool. So anyway, that was a hell of an experience. I got so many stories out of that whole experience too. Just cruise ship life that's a hell of a thing just in and of itself, man. I got so many stories I could share about that. Maybe a video for another time. So anyway, I'm telling you all this. Oh, okay. I'm actually not done with the storyline, but I'm telling you all this because you'll see. This has a lot to do with it. So during this time I'm on the cruise ship, I'm still very liberal. I remember getting into discussions with people that were not liberal. And I was just sort of shocked, like, how could you possibly have that point of view? How could you possibly think that we shouldn't have gun laws? How could you possibly think that the post office is a bad thing and that we should abolish it? And anyway, so I get done with the cruise ship. I decided at that time I'm going to go back to being land-based. So I end up getting a job at the school from which I graduated in Pasadena, but 2 years before that. And I started at the front desk, worked my way up. And, after about 5 years of doing that, I was academic advisor, student services manager, and I was quasi-interim registrar, you might say. So I had definitely gained a lot of skills and knowledge of the inner workings of higher education administration. I did admissions too, by the way. I would not wish that upon anybody. So during this time, Trump was elected. And when Trump was elected, my boss was my supervisor was black. Great guy, good friend. And, I was super Bernie bro liberal at the time. And when Trump was elected, it went into hyperdrive, and I became wickedly progressive. So much so that I even changed my major because I was going to school at the time, also outside of work, obviously. I was initially in electrical engineering, and I changed my major to economics. I was like, no, I gotta do something with meaning. I gotta prove that socialism works. I gotta prove that communism works. I gotta prove that modern monetary theory is correct, and that we can just spend our way out of every problem. And so put a pin in that. 2019 comes, and I'm still working at the school, but now I'm like, I'm studying economics. I'm learning supply and demand curve, elasticity. I'm learning microecon, and I'm like, damn, I'm underpaid. I'm not paid enough. And so my ego got a little bigger than my britches. And so I said, you know what? You guys got to pay me more. And they kind of balked, and they were like, no, we're not going to pay you more. And I was like, then I'm out. And I found a job in Boston doing the exact same thing that I was doing there. And they were willing to pay me almost what I was asking, about 1.5 times what I was making at the time. And so I moved for the pay raise, but got to Boston and realized, everything's a lot more expensive out here. You think Boston is cheaper than LA? You are wrong. The rent's about the same, food's about double. Price, power is more expensive, gas is more expensive, everything's more expensive. Taxes are higher, insurance is more expensive, like just everything. They nickel and dime me to death just to drive down the street. It's like $1.50 every time. It's crazy. So I got a raise, which was good, but was I really netting more money? I probably was, but not as nearly as much as I was thinking initially. And in hindsight, I probably should have just stayed put. But like I said, my ego was getting the best of me because I was a little socialist, progressive Bernie bro, and I thought I knew everything. And I still think I know everything, but I think at least now that I don't quite know everything. So I've taken at least a small step in the right direction. Anyway, so then COVID happens. I've been in Boston now. I moved out there in September of 2019. So not even 6 months later, COVID happens. And of course, the school I'm working at goes fully remote, and we're in Boston, okay? Of all the places in the country that went full neo-Nazi during COVID, Boston and Cambridge was one of them. I got kicked out of restaurants so many times because I wasn't wearing the right mask. There were a couple times where I was pushing the envelope and I went in without a mask, and they kicked me right out. I got kicked out one time because I wasn't wearing an N95, and I was like, I can't. I have glasses and I wear hearing aids. I'm not wearing an N95 mask. I'm not putting more shit around my ears. I'm not doing it. So I was wearing a gaiter, and they were like, nope, get out. And that was in front of coworkers. That was in front of coworkers too. So I lost it. I went through a thing, and this actually happened before COVID. I went through a thing where I was just getting really depressed. The move to Boston, missing my friends. I was things at work were like really rough in the beginning. So I was just getting really depressed. And so I finally was just like, I'm just going to turn off the news. And I literally did this. I went through and purged everything on my YouTube. I turned off all my political. At the time I was following the Young Turks and David Pakman and Kyle Kalinske and Jimmy Dore and all these hardcore progressive lefties on YouTube. I went and deleted all of them. And the only thing that I had on YouTube was like, everyday science and, Veritasium and, all these sciencey things or music related things or drone flying things, whatever. I got into flying drones for a while. So that was the only thing. So I don't watch TV. Like I don't watch cable news or cable at all. So I had no news whatsoever. So the whole COVID thing, when it happened to me, it was all secondhand information for me. It was all what people were telling me by phone or at work, or like I was a USCIS official at the time, United States USCIS, Customs and Immigration. Okay, I was the gatekeeper for the international students that wanted to come and study at the school that I was working at in Boston. So USCIS, DHS, ICE, all these, I was getting emails from all these bureaucracies regarding COVID. So all of my information was like official on that end of things. And then the other end was all secondhand, information with friends and family that I was in touch with. That was it. No news, nothing like that. Completely just shut all of it off. And I went through COVID. I went through the BLM riots and the George Floyd thing. I went through that with having zero contact with news or any news sources whatsoever. I only found out about George Floyd because of a Monday morning check-in call that we all did at my work, and they were talking about it. That's how I learned that it was happening. And they were all distraught, and they were acting like the country was coming to an end. And, I was just chilling in my apartment all day, going out to the park and working out and getting my work done in the apartment and eating food and, making a cocktail at night. Had no idea that any of this was going on. Of course, I have learned about all of it since then. But in the real time, I was completely disconnected. So anyway, one time I remember this quite succinctly. I had decided okay, I'm going to get back into it, but I'm going to really carefully curate my sources. I'm not just going to go and follow anybody that I think is going to tell me what I want to hear. I want to follow somebody that's going to actually kind of give me some perspective and thought that I haven't had before. And I thought at the time, who's the perfect person for this? It's Joe Rogan. It's not Joe Rogan himself who's going to give me the perspective. It's because of the guests that he has, the wide berth of guests that he has on the show. He had David Pakman on there one day, and then the next day he got Ben Shapiro on there. And I was like, okay, let me start slowly working my way back in and start listening to some people that I don't agree with. I had never listened to Ben Shapiro in my entire life, but I forced myself to listen to a 3-hour podcast with him and Joe Rogan. And I came out of it going he's not an evil person. I used to think he was an evil person, even though I had never once listened to a single thing he said or read a single thing he said. I'd only ever watched or read anyone interpreting what he had said or talking about what he had said. And I walked away from that and I was like, damn, he's actually, first of all, he's really smart. I can tell he's quite bright and articulate and speaks very fast. And then I learned that he was Jewish. I was like, oh, I didn't even know he was Jewish. I'll be damned. Okay. So then, and then I watched some like Neil deGrasse Tyson, and then I watched some people that I agree with. I think I caught a Jimmy Dore on there, and I think I caught like a Kyle Kalinske on there. And then there was a Jordan Peterson one. And this was before Jordan Peterson kind of had his hiatus I think he had like a long hiatus. This was before that. Jordan Peterson was a lesser known. I think he was still well known, but lesser than he is today, I would say maybe. And again, I was just floored. I was like, holy crap. I'm supposed to believe this guy's some crazy transphobic racist or just transphobe or like whatever. And I walked out of it going, man, he's none of that. He's actually none of that at all. And actually, so much of what he said, I totally agreed with, and it resonated with me. I was like, yeah, why is that, or whatever it was specifically. I don't know, I don't remember, but I do remember just being sort of like, wow, that was thought provoking. That really gave me some things that I had to grapple with, in just with me personally. I had to really figure out what it was that was going on in my head and what I believed. So anyway, long story short, once I started realizing that I had never exposed myself thoroughly and adequately to conservative talking viewpoints or conservative leaders and their well-crafted and well-articulated perspectives. I realized that I had been in one of those echo chambers and one of those propaganda channels for just so long, and that's what was causing me just to go down the tube in terms of mental health. So I started really just expanding what, who I read and who I listen to and who I watch, and basically realized that everything that my econ teacher, my very first Econ Macro 101 teacher told me was correct. Communism never works. Socialism never works. It only causes more problems. It destroys freedom. It erodes property rights. And those are the bedrock of what make a society at large scale work. So yeah, I went full circle. It's so much has happened over the last 2 to 3 years. It's so hard to even just put it all together in a single video, like all the stuff happening with Trump, all the stuff happening with the trucker rally. At the same time that all this was happening, I just coincidentally, completely unrelated, started getting into crypto. At first, I just wanted to make money. I just started mining Ethereum. But then what that did is start leading me down this road of understanding, in conjunction with my economics training, why it is that the money is the source of all these problems. Fiat is a problem. Fiat is the source of all of our woes, especially if you look at WTF happened in 1971.com. You know, we've all seen that graph that goes like this. That's the moment we became a fiat currency officially, truly and thoroughly inconvertible from dollar to gold. You know, we no longer had an anchor. We had a peg before 71, or we had a peg before, what was it, 1902, before the Fed, and then we had an anchor until 1971. Now we don't even have an anchor. Now we're just floating off into fucking space. And so the fiat experiment has got to come to an end. So anyway, but remember when I said put a pin in the econ, when I changed my major to econ? Yeah, I started there trying to prove that modern monetary theory is correct and that we can spend our way out of everything. Now I know that MMT doesn't necessarily say that we can and should just spend our way out of everything, but that's the implication. That's what they're trying to say, is like, if we have high money velocity in a robust economy such as ours, and we just spend a bunch of money, everything's going to be fine. But any crypto enthusiast or anyone that's gone through the crypto ringer knows you cannot escape the consequences of getting rugged when someone else has 90, 80, 70% of the coin supply, and they dump all that on the market. These are micro experiments, I understand, but you can repeat it 1,000 times, because that's what every shit coin is. It's just a pump and dump. It's a rug scheme, every single one of them, and that's what fiat is. And this is what eventually led me to become a Bitcoin only enthusiast. It's the only one that's got an absolute hard cap. It was emergent. There's no centralized control. There never was a centralized control. There was no pre-mine. There was no IO. There was none of that. Fully open source, fully emergent, fully of the people, for and by the people. So yeah, I got into econ to prove that socialism works and that MMT works. And by the way, MMT, in its description of fiat, is fully correct. It's printed out of thin air. That's 100% correct. But in its policy implications is totally wrong. You cannot escape the consequences of printing money. You cannot escape the consequences of inflating money. And so in my study of econ, combined with COVID and Trump and the COVID spending and crypto, all of this led me to realize that, holy shit, I was totally wrong. And I was only getting into it to try and put the horse before the cart. I was trying to prove something I already wanted to believe was true, instead of actually looking at the facts, looking at the information, thinking about it a little more carefully and a little bit more maturely. Again, I'm not a smart person. I'm not a mature person. I just try to be. So anyway, my wife's walking in through the front door right now, so I'm gonna let y'all go. Thanks for listening to my short little story, and we'll catch you later.